Good morning, everyone. How's everyone doing? Good. Welcome to the Columbia Graduate School of Journalism. This is quite an important discussion, quite an honor for us to co-host this event with the Weatherhead Institute and Keio University for a day long of really important discussion. I am the Dean of Academic Affairs and a journalist and a journalism professor here. And so just you know, the reason why we're hosting this event here, besides the fact that I do whatever Hang tells me to do, so we're hosting here is this actually is our 113th birthday coming up at the journalism school, and we were founded by Joseph Pulitzer, as many of you may know. And the reason we were founded by Joseph Pulitzer was that at the time he was engaging in really a large-scale battle with the Hearst organization, William Randolph Hearst, and they were two giants of journalism and specifically newspaper journalism, and they discovered quickly that the more dirty the journalism, the more kind of scandalous the journalism, the greater the sales of journalism. And so Joseph Pulitzer felt great guilt over this. He was a serious journalist. He felt great guilt, and he said, you know what, we got to take time out. We got to form a school, and we got to build a place where we can think and reflect on our role in the world. And so it's quite appropriate that we have this discussion today. Obviously, it feels like a million years, but the election was just last week, the week before. I mean, it just time flies by, but this is an opportunity for us to sit, reflect. I think this is one of the great uses and goals of a university, is take time out and have these important discussions. So we're very glad to have this great event here today. And without further ado, I want to introduce our kind of our ringleader of the whole magic here, my good friend Lien-Hang Nguyen, director of the Weatherhead Institute, and she'll get us on with the rest of the programming. Hang?
Thank you, Zui. I don't know who runs the show, if it's really Zui or myself. I think it's him, as who I like to call my younger brother here in the J School. But thank you to Zui and to the Journalism School for co-hosting this Keio Columbia University symposium, Elections Aftermath, Exploring Opportunities and Challenges in U.S.-Japan Relations. So I am Professor Lien-Hang Nguyen, and I am the director of the Weatherhead East Asian Institute and chair and holder of the Dorothy Borg Chair in the History of the United States and East Asia. So as I have the floor, just allow me a brief moment to really explain the genesis of this event. As many of you know, 2024 marks the 75th anniversary of the Weatherhead East Asian Institute. So we're celebrating a lot of birthdays here. And so we are one of the very first institutes in the United States dedicated to the advanced training of East Asian specialists. And over the spring and summer of this year, to mark our important birthday, we undertook an ambitious tour of Asia. And here I'm thinking we did 7 cities over 5 countries over the 2 seasons. And our very first stop was in Tokyo, Japan. And there we celebrated the life and career of Professor Gerald Curtis. And we reconnected with our partner institutions, including Keio University. Now, over lunch, as Jerry regaled us with his time spent on Keio's beautiful campus, we also planned on how to reinvigorate a relationship, and this symposium is the result. So on my part, I really hope that this will mark the beginning of a new chapter in the Columbia-Keio partnership, and I look forward to Director Yuichi Hosoya hosting what will be the next event on this beautiful campus. Please, I'd like to get back to Tokyo. So Hosoya-san, I'm going to turn the mic over to you, and then I'm going to come back on.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much, Professor Gen, for your very kind introduction. I am Yuichi Hosoya. I'm a professor of international politics at Keio University, and also I'm a director at the Keio Center for Strategy. Keio Center Strategy is a bit younger than your institute. This year, we celebrated just 1 year's anniversary, like Weatherhead East Asian Institute, which has a quite long history, 70 5 years long history. So let me, first of all, on behalf of Keio University and also on behalf of Keio Center for Strategy, let me congratulate the 75th anniversary this year. And I really grateful for Professor Nguyen's role in revitalizing the tie between Japan and your institute. And particularly, Dr. Ayumi Teruoka has been so active in trying to tie to university, Columbia and Keio, because she graduated Keio University as well, and also try to revitalize the tie between Japan and the United States. Of course, that's quite important today. And Keio Center strategy was established last year. It's quite new. But in the last 1 year, we have had quite important events, such as last year, we invited NATO Secretary General, Jens Stoltenberg, and our Deputy Director, Professor Teruoka, had a conversation with NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. And also last March, we invited Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol, and our Professor Nishino had a conversation with Korean President Yoon, together with Keio University students. So in the last 1 year, we have had amazing events, but we are expanding our programs. Particularly, we are expanding international networks. So naturally, we feel that it is essential for us to try to enhance our cooperation with a world-renowned Colombia's Weatherhead East Asia Institute, which has a really long history. As I'm teaching international history to students at Keio University, names such as, of course, Sir George Sansom, the founding director of the institute, as well as Hugh Bolton, who played a leading role in Allied occupation of Japan, the second director of the institute. So these names are familiar to me. So naturally, we are quite aware of the importance of the role that your institute has been playing. And nowadays, Asia has becoming once more extremely important to the United States. So in this way, I'm looking forward to having more events in collaboration with your institute. But today, particularly, I am extremely grateful to powerful females who made this conference possible. And also, I'm looking forward to listening to many, many important talks, presentation today. And thank you very much for organizing this important debate. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Hosoya-san. So while we gave you the historical context on how this symposium came about, and we've also introduced, I think, the most important person who really made it happen, the historical actor who made it happen, and that's Dr. Ayumi Teruoka. So Ayumi is currently the joint postdoctoral research scholar with the Weatherhead East Asian Institute's Japan Research Program and China and the World Program. So in many ways, Tom Christensen, she's ours. We share her. She's ours. When she's not working on her book manuscript that examines Japan's foreign policy, she teaches courses for the political science department as well as SIPA. Ayumi holds a PhD and an MA in security studies from Princeton University, and an MA in Asian Studies from Georgetown University, and a BA in law from Keio University. So in many ways, you actually embody everything that we are doing today and all the institutions that built you to who you are. And the other thing I'll just say about Ayumi is that she has been a tremendous member of the Weatherhead East Asian Institute. She just recently, over the weekend, agreed to act as translator for Marathon Monk, who was visiting New York along with one of our billionaire donors. And she was just game for it. She jumped into this and was actually treated to a helicopter ride over New York City. So in many ways, Ayumi, you can see how she is really the heart and soul of this symposium. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the mic over to Ayumi.
Great, thank you so much. As I was timing the conference, I was thinking Hang's spending just too much time on me, but thank you for kind introduction. And today we'll start a full day of conference. But before we start, we have a very important video message from somebody in Tokyo, and his name is Ambassador Park Cheol-hee. Ambassador Park Cheol-hee currently serves as Republic of Korea's ambassador to Japan. moved to Tokyo this summer, and he's also a distinguished Columbia alum. And he really represents sort of being an exemplar of the type of talent that institution like Columbia or Weatherhead East Asian Institute can produce through academic training. Because in 1990s, he was a Korean student here pursuing PhD in political science department at Columbia University, got PhD in 1998, who then became one of the most renowned scholar on Japanese politics and Japan-South Korea relationship. And I assign his writing to my students. But then, serving in multiple roles at various high-level institutions like Seoul National University, now he's ambassador of South Korea to Japan. And now that the relationship is under good hands, we feel a little more assured that he is there and he understands everything about Japanese politics. So let's hear from him.
Congratulations on Columbia Weatherhead East Asia Institute 75th anniversary Japan event. This is Cheol-hee Park, Republic of Korea's ambassador to Japan, who arrived in Tokyo this past August. I graduated from Department of Political Science at Columbia University. Of course, my advisor was Gerald, who is the #1 world-renowned Japan specialist. And I'm advised by him a lot about my personal, intellectual, and career development. It is my pleasure and honor to give a congratulatory remarks to this event. Without doubt, the East Asia Institute was my intellectual home for a long time. I spent most of the 1990s at Columbia University, especially at Weatherhead East Asia Institute. When I entered the Columbia University, it was still named just as East Asia Institute. But when I was a PhD student, in the middle, the Weatherhead family came down to East Asia Institute to hear the future vision of the institute and explore the possibility of supporting the institute. Now, it has been named as the Weatherhead East Asia Institute. It would be my pleasure if I had contributed a little bit when they named it as the Weatherhead East Asia Institute. I still remember talking to the Weatherhead family when they came down to New York, because the institute wanted me to talk to them to represent the East Asian Institute, especially Korean students at Columbia community. And the Weatherhead East Asia Institute was a kind of a very good memory to me in several senses. I strolled around the whole campus, but I spent most of the time at the SIPA building, especially East Asia Institute, which is located on the 9th floor of the Columbia University. I feel as if the East Asia Institute was like an intellectual gas station for me. Whenever I feel something is deficient, I always come up to the 9th floor to talk to professors, the colleagues and friends, and even to other members of the intellectual community. I still clearly remember I enjoyed the Brownback seminar at the Weatherhead East Asia Institute. That became a kind of critical intellectual asset for me, in a sense that I learned a lot from the faculties of the Columbia University, including Jerry Curtis, Andy Nathan, and Tom Weinstein, and others. But still, I enjoyed the lots of the Brownback seminars that was regularly taken place at the 9th floor, the common room. And I always brought my Brownback in a real sense, a kind of usually the bagel with the cream cheese and then regular coffee, and enjoyed talking to them. I was one of the kind of students who always raised my hand and then asked the questions to the distinguished guests from outside, and that became a kind of that helped a lot to understand the international and the regional situation and what's going on every day. I think every one of you are doing the same at the same time these days. So while studying at Columbia University in the city of New York, I come to realize that it is very important to understand the Korea-Japan relations in a wider angle, rather than mired into a history relations, or just a kind of looking at the relations in a bilateral way. So I think as an ambassador, even before I coming to Japan as an ambassador, I tried to reshape Korea-Japan relations in a three distinctive new ways. The first one would be that understanding Korea relations in a wider geostrategic landscape. So rather than looking at Korea-Japan relations only in a bilateral relationship, putting it in a regional and then global setting becomes very, very, very important. And I learned it from Columbia University. Why? New York is a kind of a natural spot to understand the international relations. That's the best spot ever that anybody can learn about the international situation. And from that angle, I come to realize that Korea and Japan can be a natural partner that have a very similar assets and network in every sense of the word. So locating, if you locate Korea, Japan in a wider angle, rather than looking at face-to-face each other, you have to think about what is the nature of the North Korea threat to Korea and Japan? Why the relationship between North Korea and Russia that is unfolding now as an alliance relationship? That is a kind of a threat to Korea and Japan. And Chinese assertive, the maritime affairs can be a kind of a daunting challenge to Korea and Japan at the same time. So how to maintain maritime security in the Indo-Pacific is the natural mission for Korea and Japan. So like that, Korea and Japan should remain as a natural cooperative partner in a strategic sense, in a wider regional scope. That's the kind of first thing that I try to reshape. And second, the putting Korea-Japan relations in a long-term time horizon is critically important. Many people think that past history issue is so important for Korea and Japan. Of course, it's important. And we have to take care of a history issue very carefully. I always empathize that the history issues, we should be very humble because it is so sophisticated issues. There are many angles. It's like a kind of Rashomon effect. So when you handle history issue, we should remain very humble and then try to look at the historical facts as they are. But we should not be driven by historical experience only. You have to go beyond that and try to open a future-oriented relationship for the future generation. That's critically important. So the constructing Korea-Japan relations with the future visions, and then increasing cooperative potential for whole region is quite important. And thirdly, linking Korea-Japan relations with the United States is very, very important. For the United States, Korea and Japan are allied partners. And Korea and Japan need the United States in order to maintain peace and stability in the whole region. So as long as we are deeply engaged and then connected to the United States, that's beneficial for the peace and stability of the whole region, and then to maintain a maritime stability and peace in the Indo-Pacific. So the triangular relationship between the United States, Korea, and Japan, that's critically important. We have to continue to promote that cooperative potential. So as an ambassador to Japan, Korean ambassador to Japan, I'll try my best to make Korea-Japan relations much closer and better than ever. Of course, I know that's not an easy job. That's a challenging task. But still I have a mindset. If there is a kind of anything can happen between the two countries. But if there is any conflict, I will try to minimize that conflict while maximizing the benefits of the cooperation between the two countries more and more. So I do not expect that there is not the conflict Korea-Japan relation is conflict-free. I'm not that much naive. But if there is any conflict, I will try to control it and minimize it for the benefits of the two countries and for the trilateral relationship and for the wider the regional partners. Next year is the 60th anniversary of Korea-Japan diplomatic partnership. I think we have to take advantage of this opportunity to its maximum to promote our cooperative ties more, especially for the future and then future generation. I always emphasize the importance of the future generation because we have the responsibility to inherit our good relationship to the next generation, not just us. So we have to show an enlightened vision for the future generation. And also, in order to show it, we have to accumulate concrete benefits for the few people so that every people in both countries realize that, oh, we'd better have a better relationship rather than worsen the relationship because that benefits us than anybody else. So I think that's the kind of my mission statement. If I just give you my advice, I studied a lot at Columbia University, but I didn't stay in the library or classroom only. I mingled with many friends, especially with lots of Japanese friends. They became a critical asset for me to work as an ambassador in Japan. I always tended to say to my friends, so even though I arrived here as an ambassador for the first time, I usually say the "Hisashiburi de gozaimasu" rather than "Hajimemashite." So the point is that you never know what you will be in the future. Some of you will be professors, ambassadors, business leaders, or government officers, or journalists, whatever. But you have to work hard to prepare for the future, but at the same time, make lots of friends on campus. And they will become a kind of valuable assets for you in the future. So I hope you study hard and make good friends, drink more with your friends and faculties, and enjoy your life. That's my advice. Thank you.
Now we invite our first panelist, and we should also appreciate that his tie color was blue.
I'm Jerry Curtis, and it's a pleasure to see you here. We have a full day to talk about U.S.-Japan relations. When we decided to do this, we had no idea what the election impact, what the election aftermath would be, because we had no idea who would win. But probably most of us had the idea that not the ones who actually did win would win, but there we are. So there are lots of questions, and we have an excellent panel to address issues of U.S.-Japan, Korea relations to get things started. And my job is to be moderator and not be a speaker, but I can't, of course, pass up on the opportunity to say a couple of things to start. The first thing is actually came to mind watching and listening to Cheol-hee Park, now the ambassador of Korea to Japan. I've had a long career at Columbia. I taught here for 47 47 years, and I'm still been involved with the East Asia Institute thereafter, and I was director of the institute for a long time in the 90s. But looking back on my career, I hadn't fully appreciated how much I would find that the greatest satisfaction out of being a professor is watching your students sort of grow up and mature and make contributions to society in many different ways. And so Cheol-hee is just one example of many people like that. Now, we want to focus on the trilateral relationship between U.S., Japan, and Korea. It's clear we're in a new phase. The Camp David meeting of President Yoon and Prime Minister Kishida and President Biden last August represents something very, very new and very different. And the question now is, how can these countries sustain the new hopeful mood that was represented in the discussions at that meeting and thereafter? I was in Korea a few weeks ago, and I thought the mood was very upbeat and at the same time full of anxiety about how will this new sense of working together and friendship be sustained in the face of all kinds of political uncertainties. We have Trump as president. Kishida is gone. We have Ishiba, very shaky prime minister. We have Yoon, who is very popular abroad, especially in America and in Japan, but terribly unpopular at home. And the possibility that he'll be replaced when his term is up in a couple of years by opposition party leader who will not buy into this trilateral relationship. So those issues, how do we respond to North Korea sending troops to fight with the Russians in Ukraine, developing full blast its nuclear weapons and missile delivery capability? There are issues here of huge importance, not only to the bilateral trilateral relationship, but to the world. So to address them, I've asked my colleagues that you're sitting up here to talk. And first, I want to ask Kathy Stevens, who was ambassador to the ROK, and has had a distinguished, and I guess the first female ambassador and the first Korea-speaking ambassador to the Republic of Korea, and has had a very distinguished career dealing with East Asia and with Korea. So Kathy, I'd like you to get us going.
Well, thank you, Professor Curtis. Jerry, it's really an honor to be here, and thank you for that introduction. I also want to congratulate the Weatherhead Institute on its 75th anniversary. It's great to see you, Yumi, yeah, thanks for inviting me. I warned her I was really coming here to learn things, not to impart much knowledge, but I feel a little intimidated in going first. But I think it does show the importance that's attached to the Japan ROK relationship, and I also think my old friend Pak Cheol-hee set things up pretty well with his overview. I was actually in Korea just these past 2 weeks. I came back yesterday, and I arrived there 2 weekends ago, so it was just before our election, and I confess, and I'm going to say this partly because I saw the Columbia Journalism School there, and I've always admired the journalism school, and I do think the role of journalists is very, very important, as we see in the press, both in our diplomacy and in our politics. And one thing I was doing in Korea, this is the lead up to it, was I took a long bike ride with a British journalist friend of mine who now writes long pieces that try to look in more depth into issues. And this time we rode our bicycles. The pretense was we rode our bicycles from the West Sea or the Yellow Sea to the East Sea or the Sea of Japan, south of the DMZ. And we talked to a lot of people. So I'm emboldened to say that, not just by being in the journalism school, but Pak Cheol-hee saying, his best time at Columbia in some ways was not in his classes, but in all the people he talked to. So we did spend a week just kind of traveling through Korea, talking to a lot of people about what's going on. And it's It's anecdote, not data, but I thought I'd share a little bit of some of those impressions with you. Of course, I spent a good deal of time in Seoul talking to many of my old friends there. And so maybe I can provide a little bit of a perspective from that. I have to say I was also in Korea in 2016 at the time of Donald Trump's first election to his first term, and was back there, as it turned out, riding my bike somewhere below the DMZ when his win was announced this time. I am struck, maybe I'm reading too much into this, that the title of the session is After the Elections, not election, and I guess, and maybe as Jerry said, it has to do with, I think of it as keeping in mind that there are political processes going on in all of our countries, to say the least, and those also have an impact on the subjects we're discussing today. And of course, Japan's new prime minister, and in the U.S. and in South Korea, although no election is scheduled for another couple of years. I'll talk a little bit more about this. Clearly, President Yoon is seeing a dip in his popularity, not so much having to do, I think, with the trilateral relationship or the relationship with Japan, but a number of other issues. And of course, the opposition party leader is in some trouble too. So, as people often say, always lively in Korea. In fact, on Saturday, my last day in Korea, I was coming back, for those of you who know Seoul, and I think most of you do, through from Namdaemun to Gwanghwamun on the right side of the street were the leftist protests, and on the left side of the street were the rightist protests. But they weren't protests against each other; they were entirely separate. But they were both quite large. In any event, what really, I think, has certainly focused my mind, and I think all of us over the last couple of weeks, are of course, the results of the U.S. election in the second term for Donald Trump. Maybe it's to say the obvious, but I think I need to say it. I think this presents a moment of exceptional, even extreme, unpredictability and risk. It's very tempting, I think, for those of us who spend our lives either as diplomats or maybe and in other professions to try to sort of normalize everything, to see it in the context of what has gone before, and to somehow downplay the disruption, emphasize areas of continuity. And certainly over my career as a diplomat, I certainly tried to emphasize areas of continuity, and there were many. I am not so sanguine this time. I think that disruption, again, to put it mildly, is more likely than continuity. I think we are at a moment where there are real challenges to the international order. We don't hear too much these words anymore about and we won't in the future, I think, at least from the American side or from the new administration, about an American-led rules-based international order. And this obviously has a big impact on the world. And I just think we have to try to talk in a more direct way, perhaps, and thoughtful way, of course, but a direct way than perhaps we have in the past. And as a former diplomat, I can try to talk more directly, even if it's hard for me sometimes. So anyway, first of all, how do things look from Seoul? Again, not to make this a travel log, but I guess I kind of am. I happened, when I left Washington 2 weeks ago on a Saturday, I went to the airport lounge, and there I saw the current U.S. ambassador, I think, to Korea, Phil Goldberg. He was just coming back from Washington, where South Korea had just completed 2+2, the ministers or secretaries of state and defense, foreign affairs, meeting together, a very robust statement issued, which certainly touched upon the trilateral relationship, but all the deep cooperation that has developed during the Biden administration, where there has been such an emphasis not only on strengthening and deepening ties with allies and partners, but also on relationships in Northeast Asia and the Indo-Pacific. That was all good, and he announced to me that he was, the next day, this is Ambassador Goldberg, coming back from that and this big statement, going to be going in to sign, together with the South Korean Minister of Foreign Affairs, a new special measures agreement, the Defense Burden Sharing Agreement. That just happened to be the day before the election in the United States. They got it done quick this time, but he assured me, just a coincidence. But I think perhaps a little bit more than that, really an effort, and I know you've seen it in Japan as well, to try to institutionalize, to try to embed as much as possible the work that has been done over the last several years in the bilateral strengthening of partnerships and alliances, and also in the trilateral. And I think we are seeing this also right now as leaders, I think, from all our countries are in South America, first for the APEC summit in Lima, and now on to the G20. I'll talk a little bit more about that, where there was a trilateral meeting, of course, to again try to institutionalize and embed some of the work that has been done. But all that said, I mean, certainly in Seoul, what I heard were many, many worries. I'm sure there's a lot of overlap with the kind of worries that perhaps you hear in Japan. Certainly I hear, well, I think I'll hear here in the United States, or I hear them when I turn on the American television news stations, about what the new administration will bring. On the South Korean side, the perennials of the reliability of American commitment, whether or not in a second term President Trump will revive a notion he's held over various times in his lifetime of reducing or even withdrawing U.S. forces in Korea. Again, increasing, notwithstanding the only two-week-old special measures agreement, which upped the amount that the South Koreans pay for the stationing of for our defense cooperation, upping that even more. The North Korean issues: will there be a renewal of the romance with Kim Jong-un? A separate deal done that looks after U.S. security concerns to the perhaps the detriment of not only South Korea but Japan. On the other hand, provocative moves that might heighten tensions, a whole range of concerns having to do with tariffs, of course, the threats on those, relations with China, again, Taiwan, deal or no deal, hard or soft, a lot of speculation about that. And I think perhaps in the case of South Korea, and as I understand it, I'll be corrected today if I'm wrong, perhaps even a little bit more than Japan. South Korea has really gone in big on investment in the United States, last year being the largest foreign investor in the U.S., and a lot of this has been driven by the subsidies and support from the Inflation Reduction Act for the building of battery factories and other things related to green energy. A lot of anxiety about the future of some of those investments, the future of the IRA, the electric car credit, which major Korean companies have used as a key calculation as they make their business decisions, what the fate of that is, and much, much more. So a lot of worry to be had, but I would say this, now I'm finally going to get to the trilateral, first the bilateral relationship. I have been struck, and as has been mentioned already this morning, that I think that in South Korea, attitudes about and welcoming of an improvement of the relationship with Japan is quite notable. And I say that as someone who's been coming and going from Korea for now, for next year, 50 years. And there's been lots of ups and downs, including lots and lots of downs. But I've been struck by the fact that with the Camp David agreement, with the work that's been done over the last couple of years, and I do think that President Yoon Suk-yeol does deserve a great deal of credit for taking quite a political risk to jumpstart this process. I get a sense from, again, across the political spectrum, and this is supported by polling. I've seen some polling I would refer you to from the East Asia Institute earlier this year, which shows that favorable views of Japan are significantly up in Korea. Tourism is up. Those of you who live in Japan probably know that, Korean tourists. A lot of good indicators, and again, the sort of anecdotal evidence I could offer would suggest that's the case. Healthy majorities of Koreans, and this according to the polling, see South Korea, Japan relations and trilateral relations as important. And there's also, I think, quite a favorable attitude towards the new Prime Minister, since this is a man that may be ready to work with South Korea on a variety of issues. All that given, though, however, I think there is a view in Korea that however one feels about what President Yoon has done, that he's taken all the risks, and that the reciprocity from Japan has been somewhat lacking. This is something that I do think needs to be paid attention to, and that history issues are still a bit of a stumbling block. But that said, a relief at the stabilization of the relationship, and also within that context, an understanding of the importance of the trilateral relationship. And in that, I noticed that just November 15th, so that's just this last Friday, of course, the three leaders, President Biden and the Prime Minister and the South Korean President, all met, had their summit, and they issued an incredibly long statement. I have to say, I don't know, Derek, how you feel about it, but statements get longer and longer. They used to be short. This one's really long. And then there's kind of a backgrounder too. But there's almost, to me, and I can say this as a former, almost a wistful note about it. We have done so much, and it's true, especially in the security area. Again, I would hear in South Korea, I think that there's been a little bit less than the rhetoric might suggest in some of the areas of business cooperation, development cooperation, which doesn't mean that won't happen or can't happen, but it's been mostly in the security area. The Japanese defense minister, I understand, may be headed to Korea. This is from the Korean press, sometime later this month. They established a trilateral secretariat. Again, so everything in that statement to try to say this trilateral will go on. But they're insisting, and I have to say, I have my doubts about to what extent the Trump administration, I hope I'm wrong, I think we have to work at it, but I think I have my doubts as to how eagerly the new administration will take on something that, frankly, I'm sorry to say this in our polarized environment, that the Biden administration sees as a major accomplishment. So I think one of the challenges for, I would say, Tokyo and Seoul, as well as all of us who want to see this relationship grow, is to how you, if you like, in some ways, repackage that. But within that context, too, I want to make a particular kind of note that I think that Americans sometime, we talk so much about the trilateral relationship that we forget how important the bilateral relationship is. And by that, if I may, as an American, say I mean the bilateral relationship between South Korea and Japan. That's the key ingredient, and I think it's going to be even more key, and this gets into the suggestion that we think about opportunities in a very challenging way. I think there is an opportunity, in fact, a need for South Korea and Japan to think about how each, both separately but increasingly together, play a role where they have shared core interests and values in, shall I say, sustaining the rules-based order, whether it's in trade, whether it's in other areas. I think that this is a responsibility that, whether you like it or not, we as Americans, I as an American, ask you to think about. Pak Cheol-hee mentioned, in terms of the bilateral, the 60th anniversary next year of the normalization of South Korea and Japan relations. What I heard from he didn't say it, but what I've heard from some of my Korean friends is that on the Japanese official side, that there's been less enthusiasm about doing something, with worries that would bring about, a fresh demand for new language, new apologies, and so on. Whatever is done, I hope that it can be a year where Japan and South Korea, with, I hope, some support from the United States, but with whatever that support is, that they find a way, that you find a way to speak in one voice about some of these issues that faces not just the region, but the world today. Other issues on the mind of South Koreans, and I'll stop in just a minute, is membership in the G7. As the UN has become essentially sort of non-functional. I'm sorry if there's anybody in the UN here, but the G7 has become so important. The ROK playing there, I think that's something to think about. And I think just generally that Japan and Korea not only should, but really, in my view, must find common cause in an era where, at least for the time being, the role of American leadership is going to be murky. And I hope I'm wrong about that. But when we talk about the survival and the strengthening of a rules-based order led by the United States, but embraced and to the benefit of leading countries like Japan and Republic of Korea, working together on those things is going to be more vital than ever. That's it.
Thank you very much, Kathy. You've opened up a lot of issues here that we're going to get into in the course of this discussion. I want to next call on Professor Junya Nishino. He is professor of politics at at Keio University. He's also head of the Korea program. He is the leading Korea political specialist in Japan. And so I look forward with great interest to what he has to say about the bilateral Korea-Japan and the trilateral relationship. So, Junya, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you for inviting me today and organizing this event. I really appreciate Columbia University's effort to realize this event. And I'm also happy to be with all of you, to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the Weatherhead East Asian Center. So today, I will talk about the trilateral cooperation among US, Japan, and South Korea, mainly focusing on Japan-South Korea relations from a Japanese perspective. Prime Minister Ishiba Shigeru was inaugurated with his new cabinet on October 1st. So just a few days later, on October 4th, during his inaugural policy speech in the National Diet, Ishiba expressed a strong commitment to advancing relations with South Korea. So shortly after taking office, Ishiba held a phone conversation with President Yoon Song-yeol, so following a call with US President Joe Biden. So during his overseas trip to Vientiane, Laos last month, Ishiba had a meeting with President Yoon on October 10th on the sideline of ASEAN-related summit meetings. So that the fact that the Japan-South Korea summit was realized just 10 years after Ishiba assumed office, and also the fact that the decision made by three leaders of US, Japan, and South Korea to establish trilateral secretariat is a positive sign for future bilateral and trilateral relationship. So, however, it will not be easy for Ishiba to manage and further develop the Japan-South Korea relationship, solidified since last year. So deeply strained by historical issue over the past 10 years, relations are not just foreign policy matters, but also domestic political issues for both countries. So to advance the relationship further, Ishiba needs to demonstrate his leadership not only in diplomacy, but also in domestic politics. The ruling coalition's landslide defeat and the loss of a majority in the lower house election on October 27th has made it more difficult to exercise his leadership in Japan-South Korea relations. And the emergence of the Trump administration is also likely to impact Japan's foreign policy towards South Korea. The improvement in Japan-South Korea relations has benefited from the Biden administration's strong and active support. Then how much attention the new US administration will give to the US, Japan, South Korea, and Japan-South Korea relation will determine the future trajectory of these relationships. So meanwhile, I would say that the current severe international situation will contribute to serve as a driving force for cooperation between Japan and South Korea. The growing military capabilities and the aggressive posture of China and North Korea in the region, particularly the deepening relationship between Russia and North Korea recently, will likely advance the security cooperation between Japan and South Korea and among US, Japan, and South Korea. So the area, the three countries have fully activated, regarding the trilateral security cooperation, the three countries have fully activated the real-time North Korean missile warning data sharing mechanism and conducted trilateral multi-domain military exercise, so-called Freedom Edge. Additionally, a trilateral working group on North Korea's cyber threat met 3 times, based on the Camp David Agreement. To further advance US, Japan, and South Korea cooperation, I think that the 3 points should be considered. Firstly, pursuing closer consultation on North Korea policies. Second, to further promote trilateral cooperation in the context of broader Indo-Pacific strategy. And third, to strengthen Japan ROK bilateral tie. So first, it is essential to pursue closer cooperation on policies towards North Korea. In Japan, the Ishiba cabinet has been established, and the United States is soon to undergo a change of administration. In South Korea, Yoon administration announced a new unification policy called the August 15 Unification Doctrine in August this year. So now it's time for the three countries to deepen their understanding of each other's North Korea policies and refocus effort on policy coordination among the three countries. So considering this, I think it would be worthwhile to establish a high-level official consultative body on North Korean issue among foreign and defense authorities of the three countries. And this should address not only deterrence measures against North Korea's military threat, but also diplomacy and negotiation strategies towards North Korea. So during the LDP leadership election, Prime Minister Ishiba expressed his intention to open liaison office in Tokyo and Pyongyang to serve as a foothold for negotiations with North Korea. So if he attempts to engage in dialogue with North Korea without cross communication with the US and South Korea, it could jeopardize trilateral coordination, which must be avoided. So second, it is desirable to further promote trilateral cooperation, not only in concerning North Korea, but also in the context of broader Indo-Pacific strategy. The significance of current trilateral cooperation, as symbolized by the Camp David Agreement, lies in advancing cooperation beyond traditional North Korean issues. Particularly as policies towards North Korea become centered on deterrence and military cooperation. Advancing trilateral cooperation that actively contributes to peace building in the Indo-Pacific region will significantly expand the horizon of trilateral cooperation. So trilateral development and humanitarian assistance policy dialogue and the trilateral Indo-Pacific dialogue have already been established. But it will be crucial to see how far these three countries can foster practical cooperation. So given the increasing importance of countries referred as the Global South, such as ASEAN and the Pacific Island countries, Japan, with long experience in supporting and cooperating with these countries, needs to take the lead in working with South Korea and the United States to implement the Indo-Pacific strategy in the region. The third, a key to solidify trilateral cooperation is strengthening Japan-South Korea bilateral ties compared to the relatively weak Japan-South Korea ties compared to the US-Japan and US-South Korea alliance. Despite the rapid restoration of communication channel between the Japanese and South Korean governmental officials, the exchange and cooperation between defense authorities of Japan and South Korea remained stagnant. The distrust between the two defense authorities that arose from the so-called radar lock-on incident in December 2018 cannot be easily dispelled. But an agreement was finally reached in June this year to resume defense talks and cooperation, and to enhance mutual trust between the two countries. A 5-year suspension of security cooperation has been a significant loss for both countries, so it is essential to focus on restoring the lost trust as quickly as possible. So Ishiba is positive about Japan ROK cooperation and likely to actively engage in bilateral security cooperation due to his expertise in security policy. Then the Yoon administration has also shown a positive stance, but there is a divide between the conservative and the progressive camp regarding security cooperation with Japan, necessitating a cautious approach by the Yoon administration. So from the Japanese perspective, the time has come to further enhance cooperation with South Korea, which is a very important neighbor. As Japan has been advancing security cooperation with other like-minded countries amidst the suspension of Japan ROK defense cooperation. So for instance, Japan has concluded acquisition and cross-service agreement, or ACSA, with the United States, Australia, United Kingdom, Canada, France, India, and recently Germany and Italy. So Japan has also signed the Reciprocal Access Agreement, or RAA, with the United Kingdom, Australia, and the Philippines. So it will be noteworthy whether negotiation on Japan ROK ACSA can begin. So with the change of US administration next year, there is a possibility that the institutionalization of three countries may stagnate, or there might be changes in the nature of the US commitment in the region. So therefore, it is crucial for Japan and South Korea to cooperate to encourage continued constructive engagement from the US in this region. Fortunately, the rapid improvement of Japan-South Korea relation since the last year has provided the two countries with an opportunity to collaborate closely in promoting the US proactive and constructive role in the region. I stop here. I'm looking forward to lively discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that last point you made is particularly important that we follow up with in the discussion, namely that the joker in the deck, the most uncertain factor is U.S. policy, what Trump will do, and the need for Korea and Japan to coordinate and consult to try to influence the direction of U.S. policy, or to respond if U.S. policy goes off in some weird direction. That's absolutely critical. So we'll come back to that in the course of the discussion. I want to turn next to Scott Snyder, who's had a long and distinguished involvement with Korea, both as a specialist on both South Korea and North Korea, and look forward to hearing your comments, Scott.
Well, thank you, Jerry, and thank you to the Weatherhead East Asia Institute and Keio University. I'm just grateful to feel like I'm in the club, in the Columbia Club, and in the Keio Club for one day. My career has been kind of a parallel career at the Asia Society as my first job after graduate school, where I came up to Columbia a lot, and then at Council on Foreign Relations, where I saw and heard from Jerry and Carol quite a bit, and where I actually met Ayumi. So I feel very comfortable. And I'm noticing that we don't have a lot of argument on our panel. I think we're all kind of pulling in the same direction. I'm going to start with what was going to be my bottom line first, and that is that the education of Donald Trump on U.S., Japan, South Korea trilateral cooperation, and on the U.S.-Korea alliance, and actually changes that have occurred since he was last in office, is going to be critical to how we move forward. And I've been sitting up here recalling that at the time of the rollout of the Camp David Summit, Kurt Campbell was giving briefings about how important it is to lock in the institutionalization of the relationship. And the main concern was always whether or not that institutionalization could survive political transitions. And I think that what we're going to be seeing is that institutionalization in the end will maybe not hold unless we also get buy-in from the new president. And so the question is, how do we do that? And I just want to echo, I think, that how Japan and South Korea position themselves as related to the education of President Trump in the early stages of this second administration is really going to be critical in terms of the sustainability of a lot of the cooperation that I think we have come to deeply appreciate among the U.S., Japan, and South Korea. And so I just want to talk about 3 areas and reflect on how the situation today for President Trump as he comes into office is very different from the situation that he experienced only 5 to 8 years ago. And so I want to start with the Indo-Pacific because that was originally President Trump's concept, borrowed from Abe, that was the framework. We had the rebalance and the pivot prior to that, but for President Trump, the Indo-Pacific was the major framing. But if I think about the things that have happened under the Biden administration, we have the institutionalization of the Quad, we have the establishment of AUKUS, and we have the institutionalization of the Camp David process. All of these things are new. And in particular, with Camp David, the great concern is obviously that President Trump will look at it as a Biden accomplishment. And so that's the reason why I was very struck by a headline that popped up in the New York Times recently, "Smile, Flatter, and Barter," which is arguably the main strategy that international partners are going to be using in order to engage with the Trump administration. And so for that reason, I think that job number 1 for U.S., Japan, South Korea institutionalization is to try to find a way to make President Trump feel like he owns it. And so that's the reason, and that's not going to happen without Japan-South Korea cooperation, because in my view, it basically means that the first priority, bar none, for the Japanese and South Korean leaders should be to meet President Trump at Mar-a-Lago together. And I think that if that can be achieved, then all things are possible in terms of sustaining U.S., Japan, South Korean institutionalized cooperation. If not, I think it'll be much more difficult. And we know that President Trump, he prefers bilateral engagements over multilateral engagements. I do note that many Trump advisors on the Republican side have actually embraced the progress in the U.S., Japan, South Korea relationship. We don't know what that's going to look like yet in terms of who will have his ear or whether he will listen. On North Korea, a lot of changes since President Trump was in office. And the biggest change, I think, really began with Trump himself, because the failure of the Hanoi summit, I think really it burned Kim Jong-un. I think he went back to Pyongyang, and I remember seeing the pictures of him arriving at the Pyongyang train station at 3 a.m., looking very forlorn, and we know that there was a lot of retribution internally for that failure. And it took a pandemic and a self-quarantine, in my view, for him to fully recover. And then he has launched what I like to call Kim Jong-un Foreign Policy 2.0, focused on Putin. And so in a way, the big problem is that Trump, as we can tell from his campaign speeches, he doesn't realize yet that Kim Jong-un has a new partner in Putin. And he may feel a little bit jilted once he discovers that Kim is not necessarily waiting to meet with him. And so that will be a huge challenge. I think that it basically means that in order, if President Trump wants to get back to symmetry, it means that he either has to make a major concession, essentially recognizing North Korea as a nuclear state, or there has to be some other critical crisis, I would say, in North Korea that would lead Kim Jong-un to reevaluate. Now, I do think that there is one possible crisis that could occur on the horizon for Kim Jong-un, and that is if indeed military conflict, the cessation of military conflict occurs in the Ukraine. Because what that will do is it will dry up the supply relationship between Russia and North Korea. And that circumstance might actually make Kim Jong-un a little bit more desperate. But I'm not sure whether or not it will be possible for a Trump administration to take advantage of the unintended consequence that might occur as a result of the drying up of that supply relationship. But I think that that is an area to watch. Another factor that I think is very important is that unlike 2018, when we had the Moon Jae-in administration in South Korea, the South Korean government will not be mediating contact between Kim and Trump. They will not be facilitating contact between Kim and Trump. They will be trying to undermine contact between Kim and Trump. And so that, I think, is a very different framework. And it's actually one that I think we've already seen is bringing the Japanese and the South Korean leaders together. It was reflected in, I think, the Ishiba Yun statements on North Korean deployments to Ukraine. I think it will continue to be a factor that brings both sides together in parallel with each other. And the last thing that I want to just mention is the burden sharing issue for the U.S. and South Korea. And by the way, in terms of the bilateral relationship, the other really significant development that President Trump did not experience, but he's going to discover, is that South Korea has over $140 billion of new investment in the United States, which changes the relationship, in my view, quite a bit. Most of that is in areas of clean energy and technology, so that also constitutes a kind of risk. But what I really want to point to is that if we think about the burden sharing discussion, and if I think about President Trump's comments in the campaign in Chicago, he said that South Korea was a money machine and that he was going to ask for $10 billion. If I follow the principle of smile, flatter, and barter, and I'm President Yoon, or advising President Yoon, what I say is take the offer, reframe the relationship, invest $10 billion in U.S. defense production, in shipbuilding, for instance, which was already mentioned in the Yoon-Trump conversation, and declare victory. In other words, expand the problem, change the subject, make it a Trump accomplishment, and move forward. So I'll stop there.
Well, on that optimistic note, thank you, Scott. Very interesting. And lots of issues to come back to. But before we do that, we want to move back in the other direction, back into history, and ask my colleague here at Columbia, Carol, to share her thoughts about what she's heard and how she puts this in sort of in a broader historical perspective.
Well, as has been said, we're all pushing in the same direction, which means we're right or we're delusional. So you're going to hear something similar from me, too. My 3 points. My first point is already been made. I want to emphasize it, which is that times have changed, and in particular, the world has changed. I mean, it is 35 years since the end of the Cold War. That is a very long time. But it's also a long time since 2008, and as Scott just said, it's a long time since 2017, when the first Trump administration came into office. The 90s seem very distant, and so do the 2000s. And the world has changed in ways we all know. I mean, geopolitically, you've heard it, the so-called multipolarization of the world, new alignments, bi, tri, and multilateral, shifts in what Xi Jinping likes to call the major countries, strength of regional powers like India. I mean, the map is different. South Korea sometimes likes to call itself a middle power. Well, there are a lot of middle powers out there now. And much less what President Yoon calls a global pivotal state. There are other powers with those kinds of ambitions. The multiplication of linkages, you've heard it. I mean, the G8, the G20 is meeting today, the Quad, AUKUS, et cetera. and the Indo-Pacific as a space that everybody seems to know now. Economically, the world has changed, and it's changed in Asia perhaps more than anywhere else. It's in Asia trade that drives the global trade. You look at the numbers, it's not an east-west and north-south, it's Asia in Asia. And within that, of course, there's China's explosion of productive capacity in the last 25 years. Politically, you have a simultaneous appearance of populist or right or wing or autocratic regimes in very different countries that cannot be explained by one explanation. There's no way you can explain the origins of Erdogan, Orban, Bolsonaro, Modi, you name it, Trump, Putin. You can't explain that historically within each country, and you can't explain it with one sentence generally. But this is a big, if you like, a big set of changes. Now, some people today talk about polycrisis or an interregnum between the new order and the old order. I'll tell you how I see it as a historian. I think we're in the middle of a long and major historical transition, which began perhaps in the 1970s or earlier, depending on your perspective, and is not likely to end anytime soon. Now, a major historical transition are not just characterized by change, because change is what's always happening, anytime. It's characterized more by a piling up, if you like, and a constant, overwhelming multiplicity of changes, all happening, everything, everywhere, all at once. That's what makes for the sense of crisis and uncertainty. It's kind of seismic waves of potential instability, and you've heard some of the aspects of that brought up already. Now, if I'm right, this period, which doesn't have a name, will not get a name until it's over, and we're stuck with trying to what I think of as think from the middle. So it isn't possible to use the past, because the past is no guide, I want to say. Not the long past and not even the recent past. And nobody can see the future. It means being much more sensitive to the kinds of things that you've been hearing today, much more sensitive to the granular kinds of things that you can deal with, what's in front of your nose, bilaterally, trilaterally, or whatever. And this is not just Trump's problem. This is everybody's problem. So I think when you think about how to think from the middle, it's something that is our obligation as well. So the second point, that's the world has changed, and I can't emphasize that enough. The second point is, of course, you've heard this too, Korean-Japanese relations seem to be changing. But this is just the latest swing of several changes over the past 35 years. Now, in last year and this year, you have a swing for the better, right? We have improvement. And you've heard all there's been an increase in expansion on the governmental level, contact and cooperation under President Yuan, and has really bolstered and been bolstered by the trilateral initiatives and the Camp David statement last year. Interesting public opinion, which is something in both countries that is zealously followed on both sides. So this year was the first time that 42% of the South Koreans polled had a favorable opinion of Japan. If that doesn't sound like a lot, that's a lot for the polls over the past, what they call the lost decade from 2012 to 2023, when the favorability ratings were very, very low and the unfavorability ratings were very high. And this year, 50% of the Japanese poll thought that the relationship between the two countries was good. This is the first time that number broke 50 since 2011. So maybe it's the end of the lost decade in terms of public opinion poll. Maybe not. I quote The Economist from September. Could Japan and South Korea finally become friends? Mm-hmm. I think the previous swings suggest caution in answering this question. In the 1990s, the contention between Japan and South Korea seemed to have been temporarily resolved in the Obuchi-Kim summit of 1998, which was followed by the beginning of the first Korean wave, the 2000 Joint World Cup, and a kind of lull in the history issue question. I would point out that neither head of state even mentioned the history question or the comfort women on the 60th anniversary of World War II in 2005. Fast forward to 2015, that's all they're talking about. The 70th anniversary of the end of the war, the comfort women were a big issue, and followed shortly thereafter by the issue of forced labor, and they became central to this bilateral hostility that had built up, or no, I should say, scattered downward to its nadir in 2018 under President Moon and Prime Minister Abe. Why did that happen? Why did the history issue become such a big deal? For domestic political reasons on both sides. Both leaders, and that includes President Moon and it includes Prime Minister Abe, used the history issue, World War II, and in Korea, Japan's colonial rule over Korea, for domestic political reasons. And then they used it in foreign policy, but it had nothing to do with foreign policy. And both countries, and this I can vouch for, both countries behaved very badly on the history issue. On the comfort women, facts meant nothing. Each side had its own story, and the stories were false on both sides. So remember that the history issue is not real in international terms. It's used domestically, which means that what has happened since let's call it post-President Moon and post-Prime Minister Abe, the countries, the governments have started behaving differently on this issue. They don't bring it up. They're not using it domestically. On the other hand, on the contrary, Yoon is trying to use it domestically, for a foreign policy issue by trying to settle last March of 23 the forced labor issue, promising that a Korea Foundation would pay compensation even if the Japanese didn't, was kind of would the Japanese companies please voluntarily? They didn't volunteer. He had a lot of opposition domestically to that. That was not a popular move. So that was the time trying to settle a history issue in foreign policy domain, not as a domestic weapon. So you have a different, and the post-Abe prime ministers, count them, 1, 2, 3, keep counting, in Japan, have not brought this issue up either. So you can see that this issue it's manufactured, okay? The trouble with the government's changing positions like this is that it doesn't mean that public opinion will follow. Public opinion can be revved up more easily than it can be softened or damped down. And critical here, and it's going to be critical for the future, has already been mentioned, is the importance of the youth polls. It is true that for the first time in the polls this year, the older South Koreans' favorable view of Japan actually increased. It was the first time, over 65. But it's really the young people who were revved up, the youth nationalism. And so the hope there is obviously the soft powers, the J-pop, K-pop, anime, Squid Game, Uniqlo business. But remember that public opinion doesn't necessarily follow the government, even a government as we have now in both places. So just let me go back into history and say what would work in South Korean, Japanese relations. I went back to Franco-German relations, which is absolutely not comparable. Okay, the way that France and Germany managed to overcome centuries of hereditary enmity after World War II is not comparable to what's going on in Asia now. But if you look at how France and Germany came to where they are now, almost unthinkable in 1945, actually, that it would be this way, you can see patterns, and patterns that are absolutely relevant to Japan and Korea. Political leadership. Well, now, France and Germany had de Gaulle and Adenauer. Good luck with that. We don't have anything like that. And as we've said, President Yoon and the prime ministers of Japan days are numbered, but the political leadership is important. It doesn't have to only happen at the prime ministerial or presidential level. And this brings me to number 2 out of Franco-German history, which is regular, you've already heard it, regular, constant consultation, constant negotiation. Not a one-time thing. I mean, I think President Nguyen had 6 summits in 1 year in 23. Lots and lots, and this is what they did, lots and lots of small board talk, big board talk, and small board talk really helps. I mean, these small things that you've heard about mentioned, these small trilateral cybersecurity or whatever initiatives. Third, people to people, and that's contact and exchange. There's no question that in the Franco-German situation, that it was the hundreds of thousands, millions of youth exchanges across the years, constant of sort of churning, and with youth in the greatest number. And here's where the soft power and popular culture really does change things, potentially for Japan and Korea. And then fourth, no surprise, the external geopolitical context. Well, for Japan, France and Germany, it was the Soviet Union and the Cold War, and obviously for Japan and Korea, it's North Korea and China, and North Korea relations with Russia, etc. But the shared core values that you were talking about, that Nishino Sensei was talking about, that's what the French and the Germans did. They said, let's find, or reshaping the framework. We have a lot of shared core values. They happen to be the ones that during the Cold War. But by hitting on the shared core values and leaving the others off the table, that worked. And the last one has to do with history. Guess what? Germany and France have not solved their history problem. They haven't. But they let it lie, and they did have the advantage of the EU, of the effort to create a European sense of the 20th century past. And they also had, and this is nothing to be proud of, the Holocaust, which was a kind of ideological glue for Europe. I think the lesson here is that you don't have to solve the history problem. You just have to let it lie. And that's potentially within the possibility of both of these countries. Third point, bilateral past, trilateral futures, question mark. You've heard a lot about the trilateral and whether these trilateral initiatives are embedded and institutionalized enough to survive an onslaught from President Trump on the question of American forces, et cetera, and who's going to pay for that. This smile, flatter, barter thing is absolutely right. I mean, both the South Korean and the Japanese government are going to play ball. They're going to play golf, rather, with President Trump. And that's what Prime Minister Abe did. I mean, and also don't play golf too well, which is not going to be hard for either President Yoon or Ishii. Turns out President Yoon's already practicing. But whether these things are embedded or not, there's enough going on. There are enough of these kind of links, small bore, many of them, to suggest that these trilats, as they're called in State Department, that these trilats, not just the Japan, Korea, U.S., but the Australia, there's a lot of them. And that this is a kind of what Biden calls lattice work, There is a kind of lattice work. So it's to use Ambassador Stevens' word, and the U.S. role is murky. That's putting it mildly. Jerry says the U.S. is the joker in the deck, for sure. But you can have an improved, as been said, South Korean-Japanese relationship 2-1. You can have it without the U.S. I'm not suggesting that either country's leadership not smile, flatter, and barter, but I'm saying that a lot of these things the relationship can improve between these two countries, even if the U.S. doesn't behave well. And there's a lot of pressure. You've heard why they might be doing that. So in conclusion, I'm going to say this as a historian, that enough has changed in the world, and emphasize that. Enough has changed in East Asia. Let me look at the Korean direct investment in the U.S., for example, that history, and this includes our present policies and our habits of mind, are really no guide for the future. We do need to think differently. We need to think not out of the box, just away from the past. And that, as I said, is not a problem only in Northeast Asia, but everywhere. It's an obligation for all of us. I actually think that, my own opinion as a historian, that the real shakeups in the world order from the possibility of Trump's foreign policy are not going to be in East Asia. And if any of you have been to Europe recently, the way Ambassador Stevens has been to Korea, you know that everybody, and particularly in Germany, but elsewhere in Europe, is having existential terror about what's going to happen. I mean, Ukraine is in their backyard, etc. So that's my personal opinion, but I think history will tell you time for new thinking. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you. So, look, I'd like to take a few minutes to have a conversation among those of us up there on the dais, and then have some questions. It may go for five minutes over, but you'll forgive us if we do. Let me say first, listening to everyone today, and also my own experiences being in Japan most of this past year, and in Korea a few weeks ago, I'm cautiously optimistic about the Japan-Korea relationship. A lot is changing in a very positive direction that is kind of hard to wind back, to undo. Attitudes are changing. Young people in both Japan and Korea enjoy being with each other. I think that, the concern after Yoon to get another progressive president who will undo all this improvement in Japan relations, that may be misplaced because a lot of young people support the left, but they don't support the anti-Japanese attitudes that have dominated so far. So I think there's reason for optimism, but there's a lot of reason to be cautious about our optimism, because it could be undone pretty easily, partly because we don't know what Trump is going to do. This is probably the most important factor. But even without Trump, even if we had Harris as our president, there would still be concern in Korea and in Japan about the credibility of America's commitments to defend them, come what might. So we need to be a little cautious about saying, now we've got Trump, the world can go to hell in a handbasket, but things would have been great if we had not had Trump. I don't believe that for a moment. And one of the issues is if you're really nervous about the credibility of the American commitment in South Korea, what do you think about? You think about going nuclear. And Koreans are thinking about going nuclear. And it may not be going nuclear overnight, but they're talking, I had conversations in Seoul where people were talking about, well, we need to have the same rights to re-enrich uranium that the Japanese have, and to try to get that deal with the United States. And who knows, Trump say, yeah, that may make sense, that may not have a problem. I think you need to think hard about, let's not just be obsessed with Trump, although he's a rather obsessive kind of personality. Let's not be obsessed with Trump. If you think about U.S. policy towards East Asia and towards Japan and Korea, and U.S. commitments, and whether they will be sustained, and if they're not sustained, what takes their place, that's a good reason to be cautious about everything that we think is possibly optimistic about the future. We haven't said a word about tariffs, but this is one thing that Trump will do. We know that. He's going to impose tariffs on our allies, Japan and Korea, and our European allies, and even much more so on our adversaries. How do Korea and Japan respond to that without getting into maybe what Trump hopes for, is that they get into a kind of competition about who will be more appreciated by the Trump administration. There's all these uncertainties. I guess I want to restate one point. There are all these uncertainties, and they do not all are the result of Trump being president. They're the result of more structural forces that are changing the relationship between the U.S. and the rest of the world. And with that, I want to first ask Scott how you evaluate this nuclear issue and the possibility of South Korea developing nuclear weapons. And then we'll come back and I want to ask Nishino how the Japanese are going to respond to what you think that South Koreans are thinking.
Yeah. Well, I think that the possibility of South Korea going nuclear should be considered as a potential unintended consequence of the collision between America first and Korea first. I wrote a book about that last year. And increasingly, I think that that is the pathway that South Koreans, especially conservative South Koreans, see to try to counter the demands on burden sharing as a way of signaling that they have an alternative. And so then the question is, what if Trump says yes? And yes, Jerry hit it right on the head. There's been a lot of exploration of the comparison between the U.S. ROK Nuclear Cooperation Agreement and the U.S.-Japan Nuclear Cooperation Agreement. There are some significant differences, and I think that South Korea is looking for a way to, that's a potentially explosive, in the context of trilateral discussions, way of getting into this particular conversation. But the other critical factor, I think, as related to where South Korea might go, is that in order for South Korea to go nuclear, I think that there's a widespread feeling that they definitely need American permission in order to go there. And that's where Trump is a wild card. The other factor that I just have to raise that we didn't really talk about is whether or not China will remain a galvanizing catalyst for U.S., Japan, South Korea trilateralism. And I didn't mention it because even though I think that the institutional direction of U.S. policy toward China is clear and the tariffs are quite stark, I just have this nagging concern about what Trump might do with Xi over chocolate cake in the event that they have a bilateral meeting. And that I'm sure we'll talk about later in the day, so I don't want to really say anything more about it.
Nishino-san?
Thank you. Generally speaking, many Japanese people still have a strong nuclear allergy and don't want to see a rising nuclear discussion in South Korea. At the same time, I think personally that under Trump administration, there will be a growing discussion on nuclear at the South Korea's own nuclear armament discussion again going on in South Korea. And in my sense, the many Japanese security experts have a concern that this kind of move will give a serious impact to Chinese the nuclear posture and give a negative impact to the situation of the Taiwan Strait in this region. And lastly, the one way to mitigate the South Korea's anxiety or concern about the extended deterrence from the United States is to establish a trilateral consultative body on extended nuclear deterrence with between U.S., Japan, and South Korea. Thank you.
Okay, we don't have really much left time. We got five minutes, so I'll entertain a few questions. Stand up, raise, give us your name, and we'll take it from there. Yeah.
I'm Gotri, a visiting scholar to the Weatherhead Institute. I have a question about the Russia and Ukraine war. And recently there are more evidence to show that the North Korea deployed military troops to the Ukraine. And with Trump coming to the office, Trump might make a compromise with Putin, and which might restore Putin's ambition and confidence which was undermined during the 2 years war. And if Putin got his way, he might come to the East Asia to support the North Korea's nuclear project for the reward to Kim's support. Recently, South Korea warned that they would upgrade its export of the weapons to the Ukraine, and will Japan be ready to cooperate with South Korea to do something, to cope with that? Okay, thank you.
Okay, who? Scott or Kathy at the end table there?
Scott, go ahead, or run the question.
I think development is very interesting. The way that I think that discussion has been proceeding among North Korea watchers has been, is the North Korea-Russia relationship transactional, as it has been for a very long time, or is it morphing into a strategic relationship? And I think that if we look at the treaty that they signed back in the summer, that treaty lays the foundation for a strategic relationship. But I think that it still remains to be seen whether or not both sides can deliver or will deliver. And so that's where the provision of troops is interesting, because it's further than I would have expected Kim Jong-un to go. And I also am very doubtful that Putin would reciprocate. And so I guess that I'm still ambivalent about the answer to that question. And I think that how one answers that question in Japan and in South Korea will probably have some impact on the extent to which they are motivated to cooperate with each other in response.
Anybody else?
So as I mentioned in my presentation, this deepening relationship between the North Korea and Russia definitely will be a driving force to deepen our bilateral cooperation between Tokyo and Seoul. And I totally agree with Scott that this is a kind of the North Korea's recent move with Russia is a kind of, in my sense, kind of a strategic decision. This is not the tentative marriage. So this means that we needed to be very prepared in addressing this strategic relationship between North Korea and Russia.
One more question. One more question, and then we'll conclude. Yeah, Ishii-san.
Name is Yuichi. I'm a former ambassador of Japan to Indonesia and NATO. Response to Cassie's point about Japan is not doing enough. I think we are happy to accept ROK as a member of Quad. It's strange that we haven't talked about Quad in this panel, but Japan, US, Australia, and India. I think ROK is a perfect additional member to that. And also G7, I think it's difficult to accept Korea as a real member of G7 because it's difficult to draw a line. Once you accept Korea, you have to accept India, Indonesia, Australia, Brazil, and so on and so forth. That easily makes G7 to G15, which destroys more or less the merit of G7. But now inside Japanese government, we are discussing the possibility of creating a POP, not K-pop, but a permanent outreach partner. You know, in every G7 summit, we invite some outreach partner. And then it's easy to invite ROK as a permanent outreach partner, together with other countries like Brazil, India, Indonesia, South Korea, and so on. I mean, South Africa, and so on and so forth. Do you think Korea is going to accept that offer? This is a question to Cassie.
So permanent outreach, I'm sorry.
Permanent outreach partner for G7?
I mean,
and also Quad.
Yeah.
Quad.
Yeah, when I was talking about the sense that Japan had not reciprocated enough, I mean, mostly, and I'm sure others of you hear this too, it's kind of an old, kind of almost cliche. It's with respect to, if you like, some of the history issues, in the sense that President Yoon took a political risk, and that hasn't been entirely reciprocated. So I like Professor Gluck's list of things that you might do. I mean, recognizing that you're never going to kind of solve a history issue, but to build some confidence. I mean, and I think just gestures in that area would go a long way in the public opinion department, and would help to provide the kind of resilience that would allow the improvement in the relationship to continue, notwithstanding political changes in South Korea. Yeah, in terms of the multilateral, I think we just have to see how those kind of play out over the next couple of years. But Korea wants a place at the table, and I think, I mean, it's kind of simplistic, and I think Japan should be seen as, and generally supporting that. But, whether it is, I mean, South Korea has its own reservations about the Quad, as you know. So, I don't think there's a menu from which you can only pick certain things, but generally the approach needs to be, and I think you've heard that from all of us here, that Japan and South Korea each have much to gain from supporting each other's voices in this very transitional time that we're going to be in for a long time.
Thank you. Well, in this very transitional time in which there are so many uncertainties, I think we did a pretty good job of honing in on the key issues on the trilateral U.S.-Korea-Japan relations. So I want to thank the members of the panel, and thank you all for listening.